दोन रावण येतात. एक शतमुखवाला आहे आणि एक सहस्रमुखवाला आहे रावण. आणि त्याच्यातला एकाचा वध सीतामाई करतायत. बरं, तो 10 वाला नाही आहे, 10 तोंडांचा नाही आहे. शतमुख रावणाचा वध स्वतः सीतामाई करतात. बरं, आणि त्यावेळेला रामरायानं त्याला मूर्छित केलं आहे. त्याने त्या शतमुख रावणानं रामाला मूर्छित करून ठेवल्यामुळे स्वतः भगवती जगदंबेचं रूप धारण करते. हे वेगळं आहे. हे रामायणाचं सांगावंसं वाटतं मला, की हे आपल्याला शिकायचं आहे रामायणांमधून, की एक स्त्री घरात लक्ष्मी असली तरी एखाद्यावरती जर अन्याय होत असेल तर तो अन्याय समूळ नष्ट करण्यासाठी ती दुर्गा होऊ शकते. फक्त ती दुर्गा बाहेर असली पाहिजे. त्यामुळे बघा, इकडे बऱ्याच जणांना एकदम हसायला आलं. हसलात म्हणजे पटलं, हो की नाही? हो म्हणा. हां, त्यामुळे ताठ बसा, मस्त बसा, नामस्मरण करूया. श्रीराम जय राम जय जय राम. बोला श्रीराम जय राम जय जय राम. 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 श्रीराम जय राम. श्रीराम जय राम जय जय राम. मोठ्याने श्रीराम जय राम जय जय राम. 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 राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की, महारुद्र हनुमान की, जनक कन्या सीता माता की जय. जय रघुवीर समर्थ जय जय. जय 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 जय. सगळेजण जागेत का बघूया? हात वर करा. जय श्री राधे. जय जय श्री राधे. जय श्री राधे. जय जय श्री राधे. सियावर रामचंद्र भगवान की. आहेत आहेत, जागे आहेत सगळे. काहीतरी ऍक्शन करायला सांगितलं की माणसं लगेच हां. पण सांगतो हा, कीर्तनात बसणं एवढं सोपं नाही. संत सांगतात कीर्तनात जर एखादा माणूस झोपला, संत हा मी नाही, संत सांगतात हो, नाही तर मला घरी जायचं आहे चांगलं. संत सांगतात जर कीर्तनात माणूस जर झोपला तर त्याला पुढचा जन्म म्हणे अजगराचा मिळतो. जाईना, झोपणाऱ्याला मिळतोय ना, आपलं काय जात आहे? नाही ताई, पुढचं ऐका. फक्त झोपणाऱ्याची गंमत नाही आहे, पण शेजारचा झोपलाय हे कळतंय तुम्हाला, पण त्याला तुम्ही हाक नाही, जागा हो, कीर्तन सुरू आहे, जागा हो, असं तुम्ही जर त्याला जागा नाही केला तर तुम्हाला बेडकाचा जन्म आहे पुढचा. असो, गमतीचा भाग वेगळा. पण सांगायचा मुद्दा असा, प्रसंग असा घडला की एक दिवस सनत कुमार भगवंताच्या भेटीसाठी वैकुंठाच्या धामी येणार होते. आणि वैकुंठाच्या धामी येण्याचं ठरलं. आता सनत कुमारांची वेगळी माहिती सांगत बसत नाही. भागवतामध्ये वाचलात तर तुम्हाला सनत कुमारांची माहिती सहज प्राप्त होईल. ते सनत कुमार भगवंतांच्या भेटीसाठी आलेले होते. आणि ज्या वेळेला ते कुठे आले आपल्याकडे 12:40चा जन्म आहे. आत्ता 12वरती काटा आलेला आहे. 40 मिनटं आहेत. तिकडे माईकवरती हॅलो हॅलो करायला लागतं क्षणी माझ्या पोटात गोळा आला. हो, कारण आतमधून मला इन्स्ट्रक्शन आली आहे, मी तुला खून करतो आतून. मला वाटलं हीच खूण आहे की काय. म्हणजे मग असंच म्हणावं लागेल, कौसल्या राणीला आनंद झाला आणि भगवंत जन्माला आले. असो, तर सांगायचा मुद्दा असा, तर प्रसंग असा घडला की सनत कुमार भगवंतांच्या भेटीसाठी वैकुंठाचे ठाई आलेले आहेत. वैकुंठाचे ठाई भगवंत कसे होत? शंख चक्र गदा पद्म धारण करून आपल्या शेष शयनावर, शेषाच्या त्या गादीवरती भगवंत पहुडलेत. आणि भगवंत कसे आहेत? भगवंत झोपलेले नाहीत. बरं, लोक म्हणतात भगवंत झोपले, देवशयनी एकादशी. पण एक सांगतो, देव जर झोपला ना तर आपल्यालाही झोपायची वेळ येणार. देव निद्रेत आहेत. कुठल्या योग निद्रेमध्ये आहेत भगवंत, की ज्यामध्ये विचार सुरू आहे की पुढे पृथ्वीचं काय होणार आहे. कारण भगवंत कशाचं डिपार्टमेंट आहे? भगवंतांचं प्रोटेक्शनचं डिपार्टमेंट आहे ना. जनरेट करणं कोणाकडे आहे? ब्रह्मदेवांकडे. आणि डिस्ट्रॉयर कोण आहेत? भगवान शिवशंकर आहेत. प्रोटेक्शन करणं कोणाकडे? तर भगवान महाविष्णूंकडे आहेत. म्हणून ते योगनिद्रेमध्ये आहेत. आणि योगनिद्रेमध्ये असताना आता काय झालं? सनत कुमार ज्या वेळेला वैकुंठाच्या दारावरती आले, जय विजयाने दोघांनीही अडवलं. त्या सनत कुमारांना दोघांनीही अडवलं आणि सांगितलं, तुम्हाला आत्ता भगवंतांचं दर्शन होऊ शकत नाही. तुम्हाला आत्ता भगवंत भेटू शकत नाहीत. आणि याचा मात्र कुठेतरी सनत कुमारांना राग नाही आला. बरं, संतांना कधी राग येत नसतो, संतांना ऋषीमुनींना राग येत नसतो, पण त्यांना वाईट वाटलं. आणि त्या वाईट वाटण्याच्या भरात पटकन त्यांच्या तोंडून शब्द आले. काय? सनत कुमारे दिधला. काय झालं बरं? सनत कुमारे दिधला, जय विजया शाप रोखिता त्यासी. काय झालं बरं? त्यांनी जसं अडवलं तसं जय विजया शाप रोखिता त्यासी, असुरकुळी जन्माया. आणि काय शाप दिला? असुरकुळी जन्माया, गो ब्राह्मण ते छळावया पाही. काय झालं बरं? सनत कुमारे दिधला, जय विजया शाप रोखिता त्यासी. त्यांना जसं अडवलं तसं मात्र त्यांनी शाप दिला. काय? असुरकुळात जन्माला या. आणि असुरकुळामध्ये जन्माला या असं सांगितलं. मात्र शेवटी सनत कुमार म्हणजे काय साधे नाही होतो, रस्त्यावरून जाणारा माणूस नाही आहे तो, की ज्या स्वतः भगवंत स्वरूप आहेत ते सनत कुमार. म्हणतं क्षणी ही वाणी खोटी ठरेल का? ही वाणी खोटी नाही ठरणार. पण ज्यावेळेला जय विजय पुन्हा ज्यावेळेला चरणांशी लागले आणि त्यांनी विनंती केली की महाराज, ऋषीमुनी आमच्याकडून चूक झाली, आमच्या अपराधाला क्षमा करा, पण तुमची ही शापवाणी मागे घ्या. ते म्हणाले, मी दिलेला शाप मागे घेऊ शकत नाही. बघा ना, सुटलेला बाण आणि सुटलेला शब्द पुन्हा मागे आणता येत नाही. आणि तेच झालं. ते म्हणाले, मी शाप मागे नाही घेऊ शकत, काहीतरी उशाप तुम्हाला देऊ शकतो. आणि तुमच्या दोघांचाही उद्धार कधी होईल? ज्यावेळेला भगवंत अवतार घेतील स्वतः. तुम्ही ज्याच्या दारात सेवक म्हणून उभे आहात ते मालक तुमचा ज्यावेळेला स्वतः अवतार घेतील, त्या अवताराच्या वेळेला तुमचा उद्धार होईल. कितवा काहीही सांगितलेलं नाही. बसा खाली. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र सनत कुमारांनी दिला शाप. आणि हे दोघेही कुठे जन्माला आले? असुरकुळामध्ये जन्माला आले. आणि आता हे कोण आहेत दोघं जण? हे जय विजय म्हणजे दुसरे तिसरे कोणीही नसून रावण आणि कुंभकर्ण जे आहेत ना, ते म्हणजे हे जय विजय आहेत, जे भगवंतांचे द्वारपाल आहेत. आणि बघा, म्हणजे तुम्ही भगवंतांच्या नुसते जवळ राहिलात म्हणून तुमचा अहंकार निघून जाईल असं नाही आहे. बरं, तुमचा अहंकार जाईल असं नाही आहे. तुम्ही देवाच्या जवळ राहता म्हणून तुम्ही देवाचे सर्वश्रेष्ठ भक्त असं ठरत नाही. असा कुठलाही तुमच्यावरती साईन केली जात नाही. म्हणजे सांगायचा मुद्दा असा की जय विजयांना शाप मिळाला. जय विजय खाली आले पृथ्वीतलावरती आणि काय केलं? अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. काय झालं बरं? तर या रावणानं आणि कुंभकर्णानं जसजसे मोठे व्हायला लागले तसे तसे अनेक शक्ती प्राप्त केल्या. पण शक्ती प्राप्त करून सुद्धा त्या कुठे उपयोगी आणायच्या हे काही त्यांना कळलेलं नाही. सगळ्या ज्या मिळालेल्या शक्ती होत्या त्या दुराचाराकडे जायला लागल्या आणि संतांना त्रास द्यायला सुरुवात केली. ऋषीमुनींचे यज्ञयाग बंद केले. त्यांना भीती घातली. यज्ञयाग करायचे असतील तर ते फक्त आणि फक्त आमच्यासाठी केले जातील, आमची ताकद वाढण्यासाठी. बाकी कुठल्याही देवतेसाठी यज्ञयाग केले जाणार नाहीत. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. दशानन स्वर्गाचा स्वामी जाहला. दशानन स्वर्गाचा स्वामी जाहला. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. देवगण ऋषीमुनी सर्वत्रासती. देवगण ऋषीमुनी सर्वत्रासती. काय झालं बरं? या सगळ्यामुळे नुसते ऋषी नाही त्रासलेले, देवगण ऋषी मुनी गंधर्व सगळे त्रासलेले होते. हो, या रावणानं सगळ्यांना आपल्या कब्जात ठेवलेलं होतं, आपल्या ताकदीत ठेवलेलं होतं, आपल्या बंदिवासात ठेवलेलं होतं. आणि तो जसं सांगेल तशा जगताचे सगळे नियम फिरायला लागलेले होते. आणि त्याच वेळेला सगळे जे देवगण गंधर्व जे आहेत ते कुठे आले? तर या सगळ्याचा त्रास जिला जास्त होत होता त्या पृथ्वी मातेकडे आले सगळेजण. आणि पृथ्वी मातेकडे आले आणि तिला सांगितलं, बाई ग, तूच काहीतरी करू शकतेस. आपण सगळे मिळून कोणाकडे जाऊया? तर भगवान महाविष्णूंकडे जाऊया. देवगण ऋषीमुनी सर्वत्रासती. देवगण ऋषीमुनी सर्वत्रासती. तुमच्या विण आम्हा. कोणा? भगवान महाविष्णूंशिवाय पर्याय नाही आता. तुमच्या विण आम्हा. तुमच्या विण आम्हा नाही कुणी. अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. अवनीवरी आज अवनीवरी आज अवनीवरी आज महाप्रलय पातला. आणि अक्षरशः नकोसं करून चालू ठेव. अक्षरशः नकोसं करून ठेवलेलं होतं. हो, नकोसं केलेलं होतं. आता पृथ्वी माता जाणार कशी? या असुर राज्यातून भगवंतांपर्यंत पोहोचणार कशी? म्हणून तिने कोणाचं रूप धारण केलं? तर गोरूप धारण केलं, गायीचं रूप धारण केलं. आणि गायीचं रूप धारण करून बाकी सर्व देवता अदृश्य रूपामध्ये आणि ही गायीच्या रूपात भगवंतांपर्यंत आली. आणि भगवंतांपर्यंत आली. आता भगवंत तर योगनिद्रेमध्ये आहेत. भगवंतांना उठवायचं कसं? भगवंतांना हाक मारायची कशी? भगवंतांना हाक मारायची कशी? म्हणून सगळेजण विचार करतायत. सगळेजण येऊन काही वेळ शांत उभे राहिलेत. महालक्ष्मी म्हणाली, आता ध्यानाशिवाय दुसरा पर्याय नाही. त्यांना योगनिद्रेतून बाहेर आणायचं असेल तर तुम्हाला ध्यान करणं फार गरजेचं आहे. तुम्हाला फार गरजेचं आहे ध्यान करणं. आणि म्हणून सगळ्यांनी एकच हाक मारली, नारायणा रमा रमणा. नारायणा रमा रमणा. नारायणा रमा रमणा. मधुसूदना मनमोहना. मधुसूदना रे मनमोहना. करुणाघन रमा रमणा नारायणा रमा रमणा. धाव आता श्री हरी झडकरी बलसागर गोविंदा. धाव आता श्री हरी झडकरी. बाबा रे देवा नारायण अहो जागे व्हा. का तर या असुराने नाही नाहीसं करून ठेवलंय. हो नाही नाहीसं करून ठेवलंय. भगवंता लवकर जागे व्हा. शेवटची 35 मिनिटं आहेत आपल्याकडे. लवकर जागे व्हा. चालायचं नाही. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र धाव आता श्री हरी झडकरी बलसागर गोविंदा. तुझी या चरणी सादर वंदन. तुझी या चरणी तुझी या चरणी तुझी या चरणी सादर वंदन करितो परमानंद. करितो परमानंद. दे प्रसादा व्यंकटेशा. बघा मला या स्वरांची सुद्धा जादू काय बघा. खरं तर हे पद आहे ते संगीत जय जय गौरी शंकर मधलं पद आहे की जे पार्वती भगवान महाविष्णूंना हाक मारताना वापरते. पण भाव तोच आहे इथला. धाव आता श्रीहरी झडकरी बलसागर गोविंदा. तुझ्या चरणी सादर वंदन करीतो परमानंदा. दे प्रसादा व्यंकटेशा. श्रोते हो एखाद्याकडे जर मागायचं असेल ना काहीतरी तर तुमचा पोलाइटनेस असणं तुमच्याकडे फार गरजेचं आहे. तुमच्याकडे नम्रता असणं ही फार गरजेची. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र ते मागतात की देवा आज तुझ्याकडे आले रे. अक्षरशः रावणानं इतके अत्याचार केलेत माझ्यावरती. काय सांगू तुला माझ्या दैवदशा माझी. भगवंता जागे व्हा. हो जागे व्हा जागे व्हा अशी म्हणते मात्र. आणि पुढचं म्हणलं काय. दे प्रसादा व्यंकटेशा. दे प्रसादा व्यंकटेशा. जगताचा आनंदा. हरे नारायणा रमा रमणा नारायणा नारायणा नारायणा. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र धावा केला. आतापर्यंत योग निद्रेत असणाऱ्या भगवंतांनी डोळे उघडलेत मात्र बास. आपकी नजर ही काफी है. बाकी करण्याची काहीच गरज नाहीये. जसे भगवंतांनी डोळे उघडलेत कळलं इथेच आपल्याला तरणोपायाचा उपाय मिळाला. आणि भगवंतांचे डोळे उघडलेत आणि भगवंतांनी विचारलं माते अगं तू इथपर्यंत येऊन कुठे पोहोचलीस. मला बोलवायचं मी आलो असतो तुझ्यापर्यंत. हा पृथ्वीचा अधिकार आहे. बरं पृथ्वीची नावं इतकी सुंदर आहेत ना. पृथ्वी वसुंधरा इतकी सुंदर नावं आहेत तिची. पण भगवंत तिचा आदर किती करतायत बघा. भगवंत म्हणतात बाई ग तू मला बोलवायचं मी आलो असतो. पृथ्वी माता म्हणते इथेच आल्यानंतर 4 मिनिटं लागली तुम्हाला उठवायला. मी माझ्या जागेवरून हाक मारेपर्यंत आणि तुम्ही येईपर्यंत किती वेळ गेला असता. पण श्रोते हो या पुराणातून आपल्याला शिकायचंय काय. आपलं जर काम असेल तर आपल्याला तिथपर्यंत गेलं पाहिजे. असेल हरी. हा क्या बात है. सांगायचा मुद्दा असा की पृथ्वी मातेने विनंती केली आणि भगवंतांनी सांगितलं काळजी करू नकोस. कारण भगवंत स्वतः वचन देतात ना अनन्याश्चिंतयन्तो माम ये जना पर्युपासते तेषां नित्याभियुक्तानां योगक्षेमं वहाम्यहम्. जो जो मला अनन्यतेने शरण आला ना त्याचा योगक्षेम मी चालवेन असं भगवंत स्वतः गीतेत म्हणतात. गीता पुढे रचली गेली आहे पण आधीपासून त्यांनी सुरुवात केली आहे. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र भगवंतांनी सांगितलं काळजी करू नकोस. पुढे काय करायचं मी बघतो. तू आता शांततेत जा बरं. थोडा वेळ सहन कर. थोडा वेळ सहन कर. पुढे राज्य तुझंच आहे. मला आधीच वॉर्निंग दिली गेली आहे. काय? श्रावण बाळ नको, म्हणजे कमी हवा. साहजिक आहे, यात गमतीची गोष्ट नाही. श्रावण बाळ तो आपल्याला माहिती आहे, पण त्यातल्या ज्या काही गोष्टी आहेत ना त्या आपल्याला कदाचित माहिती नसतील. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र होतं. भगवंतांनी सांगितलं, त्यांना आश्वस्त केलं की तुम्ही जा आणि आपापल्या कारभार जसा होईल तसा तसा पुढे चालवा. जास्तीत जास्त सज्जनांवरती कुठे संकट येणार नाही याचा विचार करत आपलं राज्य करा असं सांगितलं. आणि भगवंतांच्या डोक्यामध्ये विचारचक्र सुरू झालं. काही नाही हो, ह्या सगळ्या लीला आहेत, घडवून आणलेले सगळे योगायोग आहेत, हे बाकी काही नाही. आणि भगवंतांनी सुद्धा काय केलं, भगवंत विचार करू लागले, आता जायचं कुठं? घर पाहिजे ना. बघा, देवाला सुद्धा घर शोधण्याची वेळ आली. घर देतं का घर? आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र भगवंतांनी शोधलं. तर भगवंतांनी घर शोधलं कुठलं? तर आपल्याला सगळ्यांना माहिती आहे सप्तपुरी, अयोध्या, मथुरा, माया, काशी, कांची, अवंतिका, पुरीद्वारावती चैव सप्तैतान् मोक्षदायिका. गोपाल कृष्ण भगवान. आता आक्षेप येऊ शकतो ना, गोपाल कृष्ण कसा आला? माझा आराध्य म्हणून गोपाल कृष्ण घेतला. तर अयोध्या निवडली, सुरुवातीचीच, पहिलीच. कारण सांगतो, संत वर्णन करतात, शुद्ध बीजापोटी फळे रसाळ गोमटी. आता येऊया अयोध्येमध्ये. अयोध्येमध्ये आलो आपण आणि दशरथ राजा राज्य करतोय. राज्य करत असताना सगळी सुख पायाशी लोळण घेत आहेत. पण ह्या सगळी सुखाची प्राप्त केली आहेत, सगळी जी संपत्ती मिळवली आहे, त्या संपत्तीचा उपभोग घेण्यासाठी पुढे कोणीच नाही याची चिंता दशरथाला लागून राहिली, राजांना. आणि राजा विचार करतात आणि राजांना कळेना काय करावं. पूर्वीच्या काळात ही गोष्ट महत्त्वाची होती. आपल्याला जर एखादं कोडं सुटत नसेल ना, तर ते जाऊन आपल्या गुरूंना विचारावं, ज्या गुरूंची तेवढी ताकद आहे, ज्यांचा ज्योतिषाचा अभ्यास आहे. समजून चाला आता. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र झालं. इथपर्यंत येऊन पोहोचले आणि वसिष्ठांकडे आले. आणि वसिष्ठांना गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णू गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. पायावरती लोटांगण घातलं आणि डोळ्यातून अश्रुधारा व्हायला लागल्या. चरणांवरती अभिषेक केला आणि विचारणा केली. आज सगळी सुख आहेत या दशरथ राजाकडे. आजपर्यंत सगळं जे परंपरेनं माझ्यापर्यंत येऊन पोहोचलं ते सगळं सांभाळलं. नुसतं सांभाळलं नाही, नुसतं उपभोग नाही घेतला, त्यामध्ये भर घालण्याचं सुद्धा काम या दशरथ राजानं केलं. आज अनेक वेळेला देवतांना संकट पडली, त्या वेळेला हा दशरथ राजा धावून गेला त्यांच्यासाठी. पण महाराज, आज मात्र माझ्या नशिबी का बरं असं? वसिष्ठ म्हणाले, काय झालं बरं? बाकी सगळी सुख आहेत, त्या सुखांचा उपभोग घेण्यासाठी संतती नाही माझ्याकडे, संपत्ती भरपूर आहे माझ्याकडे. आणि म्हणून वसिष्ठांनी पत्रिका तपासली आणि पत्रिका तपासल्यानंतर पटकन वसिष्ठ म्हणाले, राजा, जे हवं ते नाहीये रे या पत्रिकेमध्ये. काहीतरी योगायोग घडावा आणि त्या ग्रहांची ती कुंडली जुळावी. तोपर्यंत मी काही करू शकत नाही. दशरथा, थोडा वेळ वाट बघ, 10 मिनिटं वाट बघ. आता मात्र मी श्रावण सांगणार. थोडा वेळ वाट बघ, काळजी करू नकोस. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र बघा, आता असं कसं तुम्हाला कळलं पाहिजे, तुमच्याकडे उपाय असतील काहीतरी सांगा, यज्ञयाग करतो, असं काहीही दशरथ राजा बोललेला नाही. दशरथ राजा एवढंच म्हणाला की महाराज, तुमची जशी आज्ञा, असं म्हणून दशरथ निघून गेला आपल्या अंतःपुरामध्ये. काळजी तेवढीच आहे. आणि आता या दशरथाच्या 3 राण्या, एक कौसल्या, सुमित्रा आणि कैकयी. थोरली राणी कौसल्या. ही जी कौसल्या आहे ना, ती भगवंताची सेवा करण्यामध्ये इतकी दंग आहे ना, म्हणजे खरं सांगायचं झालं तर कौसल्या ही सत्वगुणी आहे. कुणाच्या विषयी अहंकार नाही, कुणाविषयी द्वेष नाही, राग नाही, कुठल्याही प्रकारचे वाईट गुणच नाही तो. श्रोते हो, हे आम्हाला शिकायचं आहे. मग ती कौसल्या होती, आम्ही पुरुष आहोत, कसे घेऊ तिचे गुण? अरे कुठं सांगितलं? आईचे गुण आम्ही घेतो ना. मग राम असा वागला, रामाचे 16 गुण आहेत, मग स्त्रिया म्हणतील तो राम होता, आम्ही साध्या बायका आहोत. अरे असं काही नाही आहे. गुण घ्यायचा झाला तर गुण रघुनाथाचा घ्यावा, समर्थ म्हणतात. गुण कोणाचे घ्यावेत? रघुनाथाचे घ्यावेत. आणि एकदा का त्याचे गुण घेतलात ना की काय होईल? जेथे पाहे तेथे राघवाचे ठाण, जेथे पाहे तेथे राघवाचे ठाण, जेथे पाहे तेथे राघवाचे ठाण. जिकडे बघू तिकडे काय होईल? मला राघवच दिसायला लागेल. आणि ही अशी कौसल्या होती. आणि ही कौसल्या रोज भगवान महाविष्णूंची सेवा करणारी होती. शांताकारं भुजगशयनं पद्मनाभं सुरेशं विश्वाधारं गगनसदृशं मेघवर्णं शुभांगं लक्ष्मीकान्तं कमलनयनं योगिभिर्ध्यानगम्यं वन्दे विष्णुं भवभयहरं सर्वलोकैकनाथं. महाविष्णू भगवान की. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र भगवंतांनी विचार केला, कुठे जावं? अयोध्येमध्ये जावं. शुद्ध बीजापोटी फळे रसाळ गोमटी. आता भगवंत एकटे जातील का? नाही. भगवंतांनी पाचारण केलं. कोणाला? कैलास राणा शिवचंद्रमौळी फणींद्र माथा भ्रुकुटी झळाळी. कारुण्य सिंधू भवदुःखहारी, कारुण्य सिंधू भवदुःखहारी. तुझ वीण शंभो मज कोण तारी. कैलास राणा. भगवंता, महादेवा, देवोंके देव महादेव आहात ना? या आता, गरज आहे तुमची. एकट्याने जाऊन भागायचं नाही. जाताना कसं? ग्रुपने गेलं पाहिजे. सगळे पाहिजेत. तुम्ही तर पाहिजेच. तुमच्याशिवाय पान हलायचं नाही माझं. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र महादेवांना बोलवलं. महादेव तिथे आले आणि महादेवांनी येऊन विचारलं की मी काय सेवा करावी? भगवंतांनी सांगितलं, तुम्हाला शिव रूपात जन्म घ्यायचा आहे आता. बघा हा, रामात काय ताकद आहे बघा, महाविष्णूंमध्ये काय ताकद आहे की जो स्वतः शिव आहे. जीव आणि शिवाचं ऐक्य होऊ शकतं, पण शिव जीव होऊ शकत नाही. पण तेही करण्याची ताकद आहे. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र तुम्हाला मारुतीरायांच्या रूपात जन्म घ्यायचा आहे असं सांगितलं. आणि बाकीचे जे सगळे देव गण गंधर्व, त्यांचं जे सैन्य आहे, हे सगळेजण कोण होतील? हे सगळेजण वानर होतील. आणि सगळ्यांना जन्म घ्यावा लागेल. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र सगळे निघाले. पण असेच होईल का? आता इकडे पत्रिका अजून जुळत नाहीये, ग्रह जुळत नाहीयेत. म्हणते क्षणी वसिष्ठांनी आज्ञा केली, राजा तुला मृगया करण्याची सवय आहे, त्यामुळे तुझं जे डोकं शांत नाहीये ते शांत करण्यासाठी तू मृगया करून ये. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र राजा मृगयेला निघाला. मृगया करण्यासाठी निघाला. मात्र राजा निघाला. आणि आपल्याला माहिती आहे गोष्ट, त्याच वेळेला श्रावण बाळ आपल्या आई वडिलांना कावडीमध्ये घेऊन काशी यात्रेसाठी निघालेला होता. त्याने कावड एका ठिकाणी ठेवली. तो राजा त्या पाण्याच्या झऱ्यावरती पलीकडच्या बाजूला येऊन बसायला आणि त्याच झऱ्यावरती श्रावण बाळ पाणी भरायला यायला. एक वेळ झाली, त्याच्या आई वडिलांना तहान लागली. आणि तहान लागल्यामुळे ते सगळेजण आई वडील म्हणायला लागले की तहान लागली आहे रे, जवळ कुठे पाणी आहे का बघतोस का रे, पाणी आहे का बघतोस. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र हा श्रावण बाळ पाणी शोधण्यासाठी निघाला. थोडा त्या वनामध्ये प्रवास करत पाण्याचा आवाज आला. त्या आवाजाच्या दिशेनं हा श्रावण बाळ जाऊ लागला. आणि श्रावण बाळ चालतोय आणि समोर मात्र पाण्याचा तो झरा, ओढा, जे काही पाण्याचा संचय होता तो दिसला. आनंद झाला. माझ्या आई वडिलांना मी पाणी नेऊन देणार. अतिशय आनंद झाला आणि श्रावण बाळ धावत धावत तिथे आला आणि बरोबर समोरच्या झाडावरती दशरथ राजा वरती बसलाय. आणि आता असं झालं की तो जो कलश होता तो कलश पाण्यामध्ये शांतपणे स्वच्छ केला आणि शांतपणे स्वच्छ करून तो जसा पाण्याच्या तोंडाशी धरला, पाणी आज जसं जसं जायला लागलं तसा बुडबुड 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 आवाज यायला लागला. आणि आता कुठलं तरी सावज पाणी पिण्यासाठी झऱ्यावरती आलंय. आता दशरथ राजाचं हे महात्म्य आहे की तो नुसत्या आवाजावरून त्या दिशेला बाण सोडला तर तो लागत असे त्याला, समोरच्या शत्रूला. आणि तसंच झालं बरोबर. दशरथ राजाने नुसता आवाजाचा अंदाज घेतला आणि आवाजाचा अंदाज घेतला आणि बाण सोडला, मात्र समोरून आई ग असा नुसता आवाज आला. आणि दशरथ राजाला कळलं हे दुसरं तिसरं कोणी नाहीये, कुठल्या तरी मनुष्याची हत्या माझ्या हातून झाली आहे. आणि दशरथ राजाला वाईट वाटायला लागलं की काय झालं माझ्या हातून. हे शांतता मिळण्यासाठी इथपर्यंत आलो खरा, पण हे झालं काहीतरी तिसरंच. आणि म्हणून पुढे आला बघितलं तर ब्रह्मपुत्र होता, ब्राह्मण पुत्र होता. त्याला उचललं, आणलं तिथपर्यंत. त्याचे अग्निसंस्कार करायचे होते, जवळ आणलंय, पाणी घेतलं. आता त्याच्या कळलं एकंदर हा कोणाला तरी पाणी नेण्यासाठी आलेला होता. आणि ज्यावेळेला हा प्राण त्यागत होता त्यावेळेला तो सांगितलेला त्याने, त्या श्रावणाने, की माझे आई वडील पाण्याची वाट बघतायत, त्यांना एवढं पाणी द्या आणि पाणी दिल्याशिवाय त्यांना सांगू नका श्रावण गेला हे त्यांना आधी सांगू नका, नाहीतर ते पाणी घेणार नाहीत. आणि म्हणून पाण्याचा कलश पुढे केला आणि चुकून त्या ब्राह्मण पत्नीचा म्हणजे श्रावणाच्या आईचा दशरथ राजाच्या हाताला हात लागला, बोटांना स्पर्श झाला. आणि त्याच्या हात, राजा आहे हो, राजा म्हणता क्षणी 5ही बोटांमध्ये मुद्रिका, 5ही बोटांमध्ये अंगठ्या. आणि श्रावण जर ब्रह्मपुत्र आहे म्हणता क्षणी त्याच्याकडून सुवर्ण एवढा कुठे येणार. स्पर्श झाला आणि झटका लागल्यासारखा हात मागे गेला. आणि तू कोण आहेस? तू श्रावण नाहीस आमचा, तू आमचा श्रावण नाहीस. आणि हे कळलं आणि त्यावेळेला दशरथ राजाने सांगितलं की मी श्रावण नाही आहे, मी श्रावण नाही आहे, मी अयोध्येचा राजा आहे दशरथ. माझ्याकडून चुकून श्रावणाला बाण लागला. आणि त्यावेळेला मात्र शापवाणी निघाली की राजा एक लक्षात ठेव, तू आज आमच्या पुत्राला गिळलंस, तू आज आमच्या पुत्राला आमच्यापासून लांब केलंस. लक्षात घे, आज ब्रह्मपुत्र, आज मी स्वतः ब्राह्मण आहे, आजपर्यंत जेवढं ब्रह्मकर्म करून सामर्थ्य प्राप्त केलं ना, त्या सामर्थ्याच्या योगानं मी तुला शाप देतो की तू सुद्धा असा पुत्र करीतच प्राण ठेवशील राजा. हे ऐकलं मात्र राजा आधीच उद्विग्न होता, आता अस्वस्थ झाला. आणि तिथेच श्रावणाच्या आई वडिलांनी प्राण ठेवला. आणि प्राण ठेवून मात्र त्यांचे सगळ्यांचे अग्निसंस्कार केला. आणि अग्निसंस्कार करून राजा पुन्हा अयोध्येमध्ये आला. आणि ही आता सगळी हकीकत गुरूंच्या कानावरती घालायची म्हणून आला आणि वसिष्ठांना सगळी घडलेली गोष्ट सांगितली. वसिष्ठ म्हणाले मला पत्रिका बघायची आहे तुझी, मला तुझी पत्रिका बघायची आहे, राजा पत्रिका. आणि म्हणून पत्रिका समोर कुंडली मांडली गेली. आणि वसिष्ठ पटकन मोठ्यानं ओरडले, राजा जुळला रे, काम झालं राजा काम झालं. संतांचे शाप सुद्धा कधीतरी आशीर्वाद स्वरूप कसे असतात बघा, हे रामायणात दिसून येतं. म्हणून संतांचा कधी अवमान करू नये, ते शाप देतील आणि आपलं चांगलं होईल असं नये समजू. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र राजा कुंडली जुळली रे, नको काळजी करूस, आपल्याला यज्ञाची तयारी केली पाहिजे. आता कुठला यज्ञ करायचा? पुत्रकाम्येष्टी यज्ञ करायचा. काम म्हणजे इच्छा, एखाद्या इच्छेनं, आता कुठल्या इच्छेनं? पुत्राच्या इच्छेनं केली जाणार ती इष्टी म्हणजे यज्ञ, त्याला पुत्रकाम्येष्टी यज्ञ म्हणतात. हल्लीची मुलं फार महान आहेत इंग्लिश मिडियमची, ते म्हणतात बाबा त्याचा अर्थ असा नाही आहे म्हणाले, पुत्रकाम्येष्टी यज्ञ वगैरे तुम्ही काहीतरी सांगता ते असलं काही नाही आहे म्हणाले, त्या दशरथाच्या पुत्राच्या कामात मिष्टिक आहे म्हणाले. असा काही त्याचा अर्थ नाही बरं. पुत्राच्या इच्छेनं केलेला जो यज्ञ त्याला पुत्रकाम्येष्टी यज्ञ म्हणतात. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र यज्ञ ठरला, अगदी पुढच्या काही दिवसात यज्ञ ठरला. आणि पुत्रकाम्येष्टी यज्ञ करायचा ठरला. अतिशय आनंद झाला. गणपती पूजन झालं, पुण्याहवचन झालं, मात्र पुत्रकामेष्टी यज्ञ झाला. आणि त्याच वेळेला प्रसाद स्वरूप म्हणून कोणतरी येणार होतं आणि बरोबर यज्ञाची पूर्णाहुती झाली आणि त्यावेळेला कोण आलं? दशरथा घे हे पायसदान पायसदान दशरथा घे हे पायसदान पायसदान तुझ्या यज्ञी मी प्रगट झालो तुझ्या यज्ञी मी प्रगट झालो हा माझा सन्मान दशरथा दशरथा घे हे पायसदान पायसदान. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र त्यांनी सांगितलं की बाबा तुझ्या यज्ञामध्ये मला येता आलं, हा प्रसाद आहे, अग्निनारायणाचा प्रसाद आहे, हा घे आणि काय कर, कृतार्थ झालो द्यायाला पायस आलो कृतार्थ झालो द्यायाला पायस आलो यज्ञाचा हा प्रसाद घेई राण्यांना तू वाटून घेई उदरी येईल शेषशाई उदरी येईल शेषशाई कृतार्थ झालो द्यायाला पायस आलो प्रसन्न झालो द्यायाला पायस आलो प्रसन्न झालो द्यायाला पायस आलो. स्वतः अग्निदेव म्हणतात दशरथाचं सामर्थ्य आणि दशरथाचं पुण्य बघा. आणि त्या अजून 10 मिनिटं आहेत आपल्याकडे, 4 मिनिटं त्याच घड्याळ लावलेलं आहे. ठीक आहे. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र अगदी आनंदी आनंद झाला आणि यज्ञाचा प्रसाद घेतल्यानंतर या तिघी जणी गर्भवती राहिल्या आणि गर्भवती राहिल्यानंतर हळूहळू 1 मास 2 मास 3 मास हळूहळू पुढे जायला लागले आणि बरोबर या कौसल्येला मात्र डोहाळे लागले. ते म्हणजे असुरांचा वध करावा अशा वेगळ्या वेगळ्या प्रकारचे डोहाळे लागले. आणि असं होता होता मात्र 1 मास 2 मास 3 मास होता होता आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र बघा कीर्तनकाराची काय तारंबळ असते बघा. आणि त्याप्रमाणे मात्र हळूहळू कौसल्या आनंदित व्हायला लागली. कौसल्या आनंदित व्हायला लागली आणि चेहऱ्यावरचा भाव बदलू लागला आणि हळूहळू कौसल्या प्रफुल्लित दिसायला लागली. का तर साक्षात भगवंत येणार होते आणि चैत्र मास सुरू झाला. आणि असं होता होता प्रतिपदा द्वितीया तृतीया होता होता अष्टमीचा झाला आणि नवमीच्या दिवशी मात्र माझ्याकडे श्लोकच नाही येते. कोणीही कृपया पुढे येऊ नये. ती उत्सव मूर्ती बाहेर येईल, ती पाळण्यातून पुन्हा जाईल मागे. राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की, राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र भगवंतांचा नवमीला दुपारच्या टळटळीत उन्हामध्ये भगवंत अख्ख्या पृथ्वी तलावरती सर्वांना शांत करण्यासाठी भगवंत जन्माला आले आणि आले तर सगळ्यांनी जय जयकार करूया. अनंत कोटी ब्रह्मांड नायक राजाधिराज अयोध्याधीश प्रभू रामचंद्र भगवान की, जनक कन्या सीता माता की, महारुद्र हनुमान की. जय जय रघुवीर, जय जय रघुवीर, जय जय रघुवीर समर्थ. भजन करूया. मध्यंतर. रघुपती राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम. रघुपती राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीता. रघुपती राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम. 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 रघुपती राघव पतित पावन सीताराम. रघुपती राघव राजा राम, 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 पतित पावन पावन सीताराम. रघुपती राघव राजा, पतित पावन सीताराम. रघुपती राघव राजा राम, 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 पतित पावन सीताराम. रघुपती राघव राम. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र प्रभूंचा जन्म झाला. राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की, अयोध्याधीश प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की, जनक कन्या सीता माता की, महारुद्र हनुमान की. बाळा जो जो रे, जो जो रे, बाळा जो जो रे, जो जो रे. कुलभूषणा दशरथ नंदना, बाळा जो जो रे, जो 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 रे जो जो रे पाळणा बांधियला अयोध्येसी दशरथाचे वंशी पुत्र जन्मला ऋषिकेशी कौसल्येचे कुशी बाळा जो जो रे जो जो रे बाळा जो जो रे जो जो रे बाळा जो जो रे जो जो रे राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की जनक कन्या सीता माता की महारुद्र हनुमान की समर्थ सद्गुरु रामदास स्वामी महाराज की जय जय रघुवीर समर्थ. अशा प्रकारे मात्र भगवंतांचा जन्म झाला. आणि अशा प्रकारे मात्र भगवंत जन्माला आले. आणि पुढे 5वी पूजन 6ठी पूजन झाल्यानंतर रामरायांचं म्हणजे नामकरण संस्काराच्या दिवशी रामराय थोडा वेळ थांब रामराय असं नाव ठेवण्यात आलं. आणि असं नाव ठेवण्यात आल्यानंतर मात्र सगळीकडे आनंदी आनंद झाला. झालेली सेवा भगवंताच्या चरणी अर्पण करूया. भजाया जनी पाहता राम ऐकू करी बाण ऐकू मुखी शब्द ऐकू क्रिया पाहता उद्धरे सर्व लोकू धरा जानकी नायकाचा विवेकू धरा जानकी नायकाचा विवेकू धरा जानकी विवेकू. जय जय रघुवीर समर्थ राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की. तुमच्यासाठी माझ्यासाठी तुमच्यासाठी माझ्यासाठी अखंड विश्वासाठी जे तुकोबांनी दान मागितलं ते दान मागूया आणि आजच्या कीर्तनाला विराम देऊया. हेच दान देगा देवा काही न आवडी हेची माझी सर्व न लगे मुक्ती धन संपदा संत संग देगा सदा का म्हणे गर्भवासी सुखे घालावे आमासी साफल्या निजवल्या कौसल्या माता भूकन्या अनन्या मुनिमान्या सीता हे चरवनचर फणीवर भरता निज भ्राता दशरथ नृपनायक धन्य तो पिता. जय देव जय रघुकुल टिळका आरती ओवाळू त्रिभुवन नायका. जय देव आचार्या गुरुवर्या कार्याचे फळ रविकुळ मंडन खंडन संसार मूळ सुरवर मुनिवर किन्नर ध्याती सकळ धन्य तो निजदास भक्त प्रेमळ. जय देव जय रघुकुल टिळका आरती ओवाळू त्रिभुवन नायका. जय देव सत्राणे उड्डाणे हुंकार वदनी करडळमळ भूमंडळ सिंह गगनी कडाडिले ब्रह्मांड धाके त्रिभुवनी सुरवर नरनीशाचर झाल्या त्या पळणी. जय देव जय हनुमंता तुमचे नी प्रसादेन विकृतांता. जय देव तुमली पाताळ उठिला प्रतिशब्द खडखडला धरणी धरमानीला खेद कडाडिले पर्वत उद्गण उच्छेद रामी रामदासा शक्तीचा बोध. जय देव जय हनुमंता तुमचे नी प्रसादेन विकृतांता. जय देव घालीन लुटांगण बंदीन चरण डोळ्यान पाहिन रूप तुझे प्रेमे आलिंगन आनंद पूजन भावे ओवाळीन म्हणे नामा. त्वमेव माता पिता त्वमेव बंधु सखा त्वमेव विद्या द्रविणं त्वमेव त्वमेव सर्वं मम देवदेव कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृतिस्त्वं करोमि यद्यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणाय समर्पयामि अच्युतं केशवं रामनारायणं कृष्णदामोदरं वासुदेवं श्रीधरं माधवं गोपिकावल्लभं जानकीनायकं रामचन्द्रं हरे राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे। राजाधिराज प्रभु रामचंद्र भगवान की, महावीर हनुमान की जय जय। रघुवीर समर्थ। श्रीराम।
Let's begin our morning routine of reading the Korea Economic Daily together this morning. It is Thursday, March 26th. Now let's look at the newspaper articles one by one. The headline reads, paint 55%, urea 300%, industrial goods rising in succession. Well, due to risk of originating from the Middle East, the prices of raw materials and industrial goods are rising like dominoes, particularly centered around the construction industry. It is a situation where various sectors in our daily lives are expected to take a hit. Nano Paint and Semar Paint have raised product prices by up to 55% starting this week. KCC has decided to raise the supply price to distributors by up to 40% starting the week after next. Naphtha is used as a main raw material for this paint and its supply is currently not smooth. You can consider this to be the impact. Instability in the supply of urea is also growing. In the case of urea, while we might think of our own urea solution, it is also an essential ingredient in cement production. As supplies from the Middle East have been blocked, Korean cement companies are seeking alternative sources of import from Southeast Asia. However, the price of urea from Vietnam is around 1.5 million won per ton, whereas that from the Middle East is 500,000 won per 1,000 won per ton. That is 3 times more expensive. Furthermore, since urea is widely used as fertilizer by farmers, this could ultimately have repercussions on our food prices. This is a point worth considering. Now, the price of polyethylene used in plastic bags and containers is already skyrocketing. According to small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs that manufacture plastics, major petrochemical companies have notified them that they will retroactively raise the supply unit price of polyethylene by 51%. SMEs are complaining that they are in a difficult situation where they must bear this price increase while still supplying the volumes under existing contracts. It is said that several distribution companies, including Coupang, are currently in a state of emergency because they are unable to secure a smooth supply of plastic bags. The price of paper used for packaging is also rising. Durham Packaging and Korea Export Packaging Industry, which manufacture corrugated cardboard, have been applying the increased prices since the beginning of this month. With contract renewals with distributors approaching next month, it is reported that they will likely demand unit price increases again. It is quite concerning that this is expected to fuel price instability in various ways. And I will provide an update on the joint venture later. Now let's take a look at SKNTX. There's an article stating that the stock price will jump as the company initiates its ADR listing. Yesterday I reported that SKNTX has officially formalized plans to list American depository receipts, ADRs, in the US. However, market reactions are mixed. An ADR is a type of security issued in the U.S. market using domestic stock. This is deposited with the U.S. bank as collateral. For U.S. investors, the appeal lies in the fact that they can purchase ADRs directly with dollars without the hassle of traveling to the Korean stock market. In effect, it produces the same effect as listing on the U.S. stock exchange. However, it is said that the outlook among Hynix shareholders is not entirely positive. Looking at the atmosphere in the stock discussion forum yesterday, it seems there is some anxiety regarding the method of listing through the issuance of new shares. Since the company is listing by issuing new stock rather than reaper treasury shares, there are concerns that the value of existing shareholder stakes will be diluted, effectively resembling a paid-in capital increase. Civic groups dedicated to protecting shareholder rights have also voiced opposition, arguing that it would be better to find alternatives in accordance with the spirit of the living law. However, securities analysts argue that while there may be some short-term dilution of stock value, the effect of re-evaluating the company's valuation through a US listing will be greater. They suggest that because the US is generally richer in capital and liquidity than Korea, listing there could serve as a positive momentum for the company to be valued more highly. As an example, they cite Taiwan's TSMC. TSMC listed on the Taiwan Stock Exchange in 1994 and entered the New York market 3 years later in 1997 in the form of ADRs, attracting local capital. As of yesterday, ADRs account for approximately 20% of TSMC's market capitalization. Given that this significantly improves accessibility for Americans who previously invested indirectly in SK Hynix through the OTC market or ETFs, that some semiconductor investment funds previously invested in Micron could shift to SK Hynix. Mirae Securities projected the new share issuance to be around 1.8 million shares, representing 2.5% of the total. They also expressed the opinion that there is no need to worry too much about dilution of equity. Now let's look at another related article. It is titled ADR Challenge 22 Years After LG Display High Distribution Shares Needed to Avoid Ghost Stocks. While expectations for the US ADR listing are rising both inside and outside the company, there is no guarantee that listing will automatically lead to a huge success. Let's examine what aspects need to be carefully managed. Interestingly, there are not as many instances as one might expect of major Korean conglomerates listing American depository receipts ADRs on the US stock market. It has been 22 years since LG Display. In 2004, there have been instances of companies listing ADRs on the New York Stock Exchange, starting with Bohang Iron and Steel in 1994, followed by Korea Electric Power Corporation, KEPCO, SK Telecom, and Korea Telecom, and Korea Telecom. At the time, the primary purpose was to attract foreign capital or sell off government-held stakes. However, some argue that these stocks have effectively become ghost stocks due to their extremely low trading volume. This indicates a near-complete lack of interest investors from U.S. investors. Currently, the daily trading volume for the ADRs of the 8 listed companies amounts to only about $10 million or approximately 15 billion KRW. Judging that the returns were insufficient, compared to management costs, Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor Company even delisted their depository receipts from Luxembourg. The investment banking industry points out that SK Hynix must significantly increase its ADR volume to ensure success. They argue that for global passive funds to incorporate SK Hynix into their portfolios, there must be sufficient liquidity to prevent a major impact on the stock price when they liquidate their positions. It is worth noting that there is a growing opinion that if a company wants to receive treatment comparable to Micron, the scale of its ADR listing must exceed 10% of its total issued shares, Now, yesterday, SK Hynix's stock price rose 0.91% out of center close at 995,001. Next, let's look at the automotive sector. The article is titled GM Invests in Korea for the First Time in 6 Years Amid Rumors of Withdrawal. General Motors of the United States announced that it has decided to invest $600 million, approximately 880 billion won in GM Korea. They even held a celebratory event with the labor union at the Incheon Bupyeong plant yesterday. This marks GM's first large-scale investment in Korea in 6 years, following its 1 trillion won investment in the Changwon investment in South Gyeongsang province in 2020. GM also closed its Gunsan plant in 2018. At the time, the state-run Korea Development Bank invested 810 billion won in GM Korea and secured a promise to maintain domestic production for at least 10 years. However, that promised 10-year period ends the year after next. There were significant concerns that GM Korea might withdraw from Korea once that time passed. However, with the recent announcement to invest $600 million in Korea, analysts suggest that rumors of withdrawal will subside for the time being. The plan for Korea is to establish the Bupyeong and Changwon plants as their own production hubs for small SUVs. Half of the $600 million will be invested in factory modernization, while the remaining $300 million is drawing particular attention. They have decided to purchase new presses, which are machines that insert steel plates and press them to stamp out car shapes to stamp out. While installing such expensive equipment reportedly costs hundreds of billions of won, they certainly wouldn't just let it sit idle. Analysts suggest that the introduction of these presses will enable the Korean plants to produce a wider variety of vehicle models. GM Korea suffered massive losses in 2020 and 2021. However, since then, business performance has been improving as models developed and produced at its Korean factories have gained popularity in the US market. But a representative model is the Chevrolet Trax crossover with nearly 300,000 units exported last year. It set a record as the highest exported single model from Korea. Currently, exports to the US account for 86% of GM Korea's total sales. However, domestic sales have shrunk significantly. Last year, finished vehicle sales in Korea amounted to only around 15,000 units, but some expect that if the lineup is diversified, the company will engage in more aggressive marketing in the Korean market. Now, looking at GM stock price on the US stock market, there was almost no change last night. It closed flat at 76,61 cents. Now, let's look at a plan for the gaming industry. It is an article titled Kakao Games Acquires Japan's Yao. Kakao has decided to transfer Kakao Games, one of its subsidiaries, to Japan's line Yao. Kakao plans to sell a portion of its shares in games while simultaneously conducting a paid-in capital increase through a third-party allocation and issuing convertible bonds amicable. Although the specific scale of the transaction has not been fully confirmed, the payment deadline for the paid-in capital increase NCB issuance has reportedly been set for May 29. Once the transaction is fully completed, Line Yao is expected to become the largest shareholder of Kakao Games, holding approximately 33% of the shares. Kakao, currently holding 44% of Games, will see its stake drop to around 14%, falling to become the second largest shareholder. While management control will transfer to Line Yao, Kakao has announced plans to retain a small stake and continue a cooperative relationship. Kakao has recently been continuously divesting underperforming businesses and unnecessary assets. Not long ago, it sold its subsidiary Kakao Healthcare to CHA Biotech, and it is continuing to reduce the number of affiliates through measures such as spinning off and selling off its portal business. In this process, Kakao Games also became a target for restructuring. Since the success of Odin, released 5 years ago, Kakao Games has not released any significant new titles. Mass annual revenue, which once exceeded 1 trillion won, shrank to below 500 billion won last year, and operating profit even turned into a deficit. From Kakao's perspective, this is interpreted as a strategy to acknowledge the growth limitations in the game industry and concentrate its influence on KakaoTalk and AI. Now, regarding Line, many of you are likely aware that it is a company created through a partnership between SoftBank and Naver. They operate Line, known as Japan's national messenger, and the portal site Yao Japan. However, while these businesses are performing well, the lack of killer content capable of retaining users for the long term was a concern. It seems they decided to try something with games, which led to the acquisition of Kakao Games. As for the stock price, there was no significant fluctuation yesterday. Kakao closed at 49,500 won, up 1.76%, while Kakao Games recorded 14,180 won, up 1.36%. Now let's summarize the situation in the stock market. Yesterday, the Kospi Index closed at 5,642, up 1.59%, and the Kosdaq Index closed at 1,159, up 3.4%. The market rose strongly in the early trading session due to expectations of a ceasefire between the US and Iran, but the gains narrowed somewhat as retail investors released sell orders to realize profits. The $1 exchange rate recorded 1,499.71 yesterday, up 4.51 based on the weekly closing price. It rose slightly further overnight to close at 1,001.71. Looking at the Kospi situation first, institutions led the index rise by net buying over 2 trillion won, while retail and foreign investors sold stocks. Net selling by foreign investors on the Kospi has exceeded 23 trillion won this month. Yesterday, the securities, cons, and non-defense sectors generally showed strength. Now stuff. Let's take a look at DLENC, a notable stock that showed a significant rise. The company announced that it has signed a $10 million contract with X Energy, a U.S. small modular reactor SMR manufacturer, for SMR standardization design. While the amount, around 15 billion won, may not seem like a huge sum, the details are significant. SMR standardization can be viewed as the design framework that forms the backbone of SMR construction. It essentially involves structuring how various facilities within the power plant will interconnect and operate. While the company attaches significance to this, as it marks the first time a domestic construction firm is directly undertaking this task. The have announced plans to complete the design by the first half of next year by leveraging the technology and experience accumulated in the plant sector. DLNC closed at 69,301 yesterday, rising 14.93% to 93%. Let's turn our attention to the Kazakh market. Foreign investors made net purchases of over 300 million won, and institutions also bought a small amount. Conversely, individual investors were seen selling stocks on the Kazakh. Capitalization of Shriram Pharmaceutical, which ranked at $1, continues to rise. Yesterday it surged 19.12% of close at 1,115,000 won. Based on the closing price, it descended to the status of an emperor stock. A stock priced over 1 million won is typically referred to by the nickname emperor stock. This marks the first time an emperor stock has been Kazakh since EcoPro in 2023, a gap of 2 years and 7 months, a gap of 2. The company's recent surge is driven by expectations regarding the development of oral insulin. Yesterday, reports emerged that the CEO mentioned the possibility of delivering significant news regarding a restructuring of the company within a few days. However, given this premature bump, the company needs to meet expectations, so we will need to see what exactly happens. Now, among other stocks that have risen significantly, there is the game company SpaceX. They announced that global sales of Crimson Desert trims reached 3 million copies in just 4 days. This has been recorded as the highest-selling Korean package game in the shortest period of time in history. The stock price had plummeted for a while, but yesterday it rose by another 23.34% to close at 5,200 won. Also among listed stocks, a company called Handpass listed on the Kosdaq yesterday and began trading. It doubled before falling slightly, closing at 27,200 won, up 43%. Now, let's check a few more news items related to listed companies. There is an article titled SpaceX Listing Process This Week, Aerospace Stocks on the Rise. Yesterday, most aerospace-related stocks in the Korean stock market recorded gains. This can be attributed to the SpaceX effect, referring to Elon Musk's company. SpaceX is reportedly set to file for an initial public offering IPO with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission SEC as early as this week. Upon listing, the company is expected to reach a valuation of up to $1.735 trillion and raise $75 billion. In other words, its market value would reach 2,600 trillion won, and it is expected to raise 113 trillion won in capital. This is a scale truly unimaginable in the domestic stock market. Previously, the record for fundraising was held by Saudi Arabia's Aramco at $29 billion, but this is expected to be a massive event that more than doubles that figure. It is projected that upon listing, SpaceX will instantly rise to the 7th position in global market capitalization. Above all, expectations are forming that the influx of significant capital into the aerospace theme will serve as a catalyst for structural growth across the entire industrial ecosystem. Even Korean companies are dancing along with the crowd. However, warnings are also emerging that overly high expectations should be avoided. According to a report by KBD Securities, Korea's space industry has limited technological accumulation in the fields of launch vehicles and satellite platforms. The reports suggested that investments should focus on proven companies demonstrating actual profitability in ancillary areas such as telecommunications, observation services, and satellite data utilization. Now, looking at the stock prices of related companies, yesterday, Hana Aerospace closed at 1.4 million won, up 4.87%. Next one rose in the 14% range, Korea Aerospace in the 4% range, and Kinko, an aircraft parts manufacturer, and aerospace recorded gains in the 17% range. Let's move on to the next article. It is titled, HMM orders vessels for very large crude carriers, catching 2 birds with 1 stone, container bulk carriers. It is reported that HMM, Korea's largest shipping company, has placed an order for the hulls of very large crude carriers, VLCCs, with an Asian shipyard. Considering that HMM currently owns 14 VLCs, this is being evaluated as a significant investment. The industry estimates that the company spent approximately 800 million won. Recently, with Middle Eastern crude oil failing to be properly supplied domestically, freight rates for VLCCs are being cancelled. Consequently, an unusual phenomenon is occurring where the value of immediately operational second-hand vessels is skyrocketing. It is being assessed that the company made preemptive investments before ship prices rose further due to the supply-demand imbalance. Now, HMM is also continuing its investment in container ships. The company's main focus has traditionally been container shipping. It is estimated the total amount invested by HMM in container and bulk carriers in the first quarter of this year combined will be around 2 trillion won. Yesterday, HMM's stock price remained unchanged, neither rising nor falling, recording 19,931. Next article. It is about Altogen's 820 billion won technology export to Biogen. Altogen announced that it has renewed a commercial license agreement with the global pharmaceutical company Biogen for the development of injectable forms of two biopharmaceutical products utilizing LTP. The wording is incredibly difficult, isn't it? ALTP4 is a platform that converts medications administered via intravenous injection into injectable forms, and it can be considered an iconic technology for Altogen. Under this agreement, Altogen will receive $20 million upfront and an additional $10 million upon entering the development of a second product of product. Depending on the stages of clinical trials and product development, the company could receive up to $549 million in additional payments. Furthermore, upon product launch, the company will receive royalties based on a certain percentage of net sales. When all these factors are combined, the total contract value could reach approximately 860 billion KRW. Yesterday, during regular trading, Altogen rose 0.84%, 354%, 395 KRW. This news was officially disclosed after the market closed. The stock showed a strong upward trend in the aftermarket session, and looking at the pre-market session now, it continues to record gains of over 10%. Now let's move on to the next article. This is an article titled Frozen Gimbap Phenomenon, Export Expansion, CheilJedang Fully Automated Production. CheilJedang has introduced and begun operating an automated frozen gimbap production facility at its Jinja plant in North Chungcheong province, marking a first in the food industry. The company explains that this move is intended to respond to increasing global demand. A key feature of this production line is that it automates everything from ingredient input to the process of cutting and packing the gimbap. It reportedly took about a year and a half to develop. Now, Bibigo Gimbap was launched 3 years ago and is currently sold in 25 countries, including the US, Europe, and Japan. The sales growth rate is performing well. It is reportedly recording an annual average of 130%, and 6 varieties are being released, including flavors such as bulgogi and juk. I haven't tried it myself, so I'm not sure what it tastes like. The company says the texture has improved, but I wonder what it will taste like. CJ's strategy is to develop gimbap into a flagship export product, following in the footsteps of Bibigo dumplings. Yesterday, CheilJedang rose 0.69% and closed at 219,000 won. Now let's look at the next article. We will also examine news regarding overseas companies. The article is titled Sony-Honda EV Project Fails Due to Slowing Global Demand. A Japanese economic media outlet reported that the electric vehicle development project jointly pursued by Japan's Sony and Honda has fallen through. The two companies established a joint venture in 2022 and plan to launch their first sedan-type electric vehicle in the US within this year. However, it appears this plan has gone awry as the global electric vehicle market has recently faced difficulties. In particular, in the US, which was targeted as a key market, policies supporting EV purchases have been scaled back following a change in administration. Additionally, as environmental regulations have been relaxed, the overall sales situation for electric vehicles is becoming challenging. It appears that other electric vehicle businesses being pursued independently by Honda are also continuously facing setbacks. Honda announced this month that it would halt the development of several vehicle models after extensively re-evaluating its electric vehicle development plans. A total loss of 1.33 trillion yen has been recorded, and once this is reflected, financial losses are expected to be substantial. Honda Motor, listed on the Japanese stock market, rose 1.04% yesterday to close at 314 yen. Now let's look at the next article. It is titled Earnings Report and Volkswagen to Manufacture Weapon Parts at Car Factory. Volkswagen, Germany's representative automaker, is reportedly discussing with an Israeli defense company a plan to convert its Osnabrück plant into a facility that produces equipment related to Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system, Avidiumag. According to a Financial Times article, this Osnabrück plant was scheduled to cease vehicle production 2 years ago following a labor management agreement. It is not scheduled to produce any more cars starting next year. Volkswagen has been deliberating significantly on how to utilize this best plan, but the report suggested that if the workers agree to the production line conversion, production of Iron Dome component equipment could begin around early next year. Now, Germany has been regarded as one of the European nations that strongly supports Israel. The Financial Times described this as a symbolic example of the German automotive industry finding a breakthrough in the defense sector, having been hit hard by intensifying competition from China and delays in the transition to electric vehicles. On the German stock market, Volkswagen rose 1.35% last night, closing at 90.05 euros. Now let's take a look at the situation in the Middle East. The New York stock market closed on strong last night. Expectations were spreading following news that the U.S. had presented Iran with 15 conditions for a ceasefire and requested a 1-month truce. While Iran has firmly drawn a line, stating it has no intention of talking with the U.S., there is also a prevailing sentiment that it is reviewing the conditions presented by the U.S. In fact, it even counter-demanded 5 conditions for a ceasefire. It appears that a war of nerves is currently underway, and the financial markets are viewing the situation with cautious optimism. However, it is difficult to say that the overall trend of the stock market has shifted significantly. The market rises whenever Iran shows a negative reaction, but then pulls back slightly, maintaining a sense of caution. Nevertheless, the upward trend appeared to be sustained to some extent. Israeli broadcasters reported that President Trump could officially declare a ceasefire in the war with Iran this Saturday, the 28th. Also, it has been reported that the date for the U.S.-China summit, which was postponed due to the war with Iran, has been confirmed for mid-May. According to an announcement by the White House spokesperson, President Trump's visit to China and his meeting with President Xi Jinping are scheduled to take place over 2 days, starting on May 14. Does this mean that the situation could be fully resolved by then? Yes. Now, let's take another look at the overall stock market situation through the market map. All 3 major indices have risen. The Dow Jones rose 0.66% 46,428. The S&P 500 rose 0.54% to 6,591. And the Nasdaq rose 0.77% to 22,909. Oil prices also appear to be falling amid these signals that the door to dialogue between the two countries is open. Brent crude fell 2.2% last night to the $2 level. And sub-Texas crude also dropped 2.2% to close at the $90 per barrel level. U.S. Treasury yields also dropped slightly. The 10-year yield fell 4 basis points, and the 2-year yield fell 5 basis points. International bond prices rebounded by about 1%. Now, last night, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde stated regarding inflation concerns caused by soaring energy prices that she would ignore the shock if it were short-term, but would introduce strong measures if it continues. Financial markets anticipate that Europe will raise policy interest rates about twice by this autumn at the latest. Now, looking at the trends of major stocks, there is a mix of gains and losses. In the semiconductor sector, fortunes are currently mixed for individual companies. Micron continues to fall. After declining for 5 consecutive trading days, it closed last night down another 3.4% to the dollar. On the other hand, Nvidia rose 1.9% to reach the $178 mark, while AMD and Intel showed gains exceeding 7%. Among other notable stocks, the share price of the low-cost airline JetBlue jumped more than 10% following news that it is seeking a merger with a competitor. Now let's take a look at the meta regarding big tech stocks, which are heavily held by retail investors in the West. Foreign media reported that Reality Labs, which developed virtual reality devices, laid off hundreds of employees to focus more on artificial intelligence. Reality Labs had already cut over 1,000 employees in January, meaning this effectively amounts to further reductions. Now, there is one more piece of news involving Meta and Google. A U.S. court jury has ruled that Meta and Google must pay $6 million in damages in a lawsuit related to social media addiction among teenagers. If this ruling is finalized, Meta will bear 70% of the costs and Google 30%. Meta's stock price closed at $594, up 0.33%. Google's stock Alphabet closed at the $290 mark, up 0.17%. Now let's wrap up by solving a quiz together. The first unit of this Korea's first multi-purpose fighter jet was rolled out yesterday. We asked what the name of this fighter jet is, which is called the pinnacle of K-defense technology. 7,300 people participated. 21% answered K9, and 50% answered KF-21, and 29% answered Janmotsav-2. Washan. I was wondering how many of our viewers might be clueless and what we would do if they all got it right, but that wasn't the case. I will show you the answer right away through the article. Okay, the answer is the KF-21, which you all selected. It is the first supersonic fighter jet developed independently by the Republic of Korea. The first production unit was rolled out yesterday. This was a project that took a very long time. It had been 25 years since President Kim Dae-jung launched the domestic fighter jet development project in 2001. System development began in 2015, and this achievement was accomplished in just 10 years. Now, the K9 that you all picked is the name of a self-propelled artillery piece, and the 2 stands for missile. This fighter jet is receiving great anticipation as it may expand Korea's arms exports, which have so far focused on ground firepower equipment and guided weapons to air bases around the world. As I described earlier as the culmination of K-Defense, the KF-21 is a product that embodies the concentrated capabilities of our defense companies. The Korea aerospace industry, KI, took the lead with over 600 companies participating, including Hana and LI Next One. Now, the first production KF-21 you are seeing on the screen is scheduled to be delivered to the Air Force this September. The AFRMO has plans to deploy 1,000 units by 2032. Are there any of you brothers who served in the AFRMO? As a former Air Force enlisted man, seeing an aircraft like this brings back a lot of old memories. Let's have a chat with our Air Force brothers separately later. Exports to various countries are also on the horizon. The president of Indonesia is scheduled for a state visit this month, and it is reported that an export contract agreement for the procurement of the KF-2 will be signed. Peru is also considered a potential export candidate, and it is said that the Philippines is also showing interest. Although the production cost per unit for this fighter jet has never been officially announced, it is currently reported to be 120 billion won. Even taking into account recent exchange rates and component prices, it is being evaluated as competitive. It is said that KI's order target for this year, released in February, exceeds 10 trillion won, a figure calculated taking into account the expected export volume of KF-21s. Well, today we've covered quite a bit of this kind of battle planning. Now, before we chat, let's take a look at the pre-market situation. Samsung Electronics has fallen by more than 1%, and SK Hynix is starting with a negative trend in the 2% range. The movements of various stocks are mixed. Hyundai Motor is also at a slightly bearish level. Fairvis and Alteo are both recording double-digit growth rates today. 300 Pharmaceuticals also rising by another 5%. Yes. I will summarize how the diverging trends of semiconductor and biotech stocks will unfold in tomorrow's broadcast. Now, let's take a look at the messages you have left. Fly, you wrote, my husband suggested painting the iron door while talking about naphtha, but I should have bought the paint last week. I feel sorry for my husband. If it's a 50% drop, it really has gotten much more expensive, hasn't it? I am truly worried that this could continue in the future. Who said there is no solution for the oil prices? Bloom remarked everything is jumping. Shawa mentioned that she is concerned about this bag shortage. Kim So-hyun said, I stopped by 2 convenience stores on my way home from work yesterday, but they said they didn't have any bags, but I just heard that they would be restocked on Friday. There are also opinions. I quote, recently, there are many distributors selling in paper bags. Now, Kudi gave a sharp assessment after seeing an article about Kakao Games saying, quote, they expanded like an octopus, but in the end, they are selling everything off. Mimini commented, quote, this is about the first apartment release of Red Desert. I remember the stock price dropping significantly when Red Desert was first launched, so it's fascinating to see it suddenly rising starting yesterday. Finally, John Youngjin said, since oil prices are rising, I hope my salary goes up too. That's right. I agree. I wish the story would reach the boss. Now, In-sang said, I came on a trip with my wife's older sister and my mother-in-law, Omkar. Even so, I woke up just to watch the morning routine. You told me that you can't wait to watch the morning routine, even when you're away from home. Oh, that is truly the image of an exemplary head of the household. Yes, thank you so much. YHM said, I'm in 5th grade of elementary school. I listen to this every morning before going to school. Oh, you are destined for greatness. The future of South Korea is bright. Now, Europa said, I've been listening to the live stream this week thanks to the afternoon shift. After listening for 10 months, I'm getting used to some of the swear words, so it gives me strength. You'll become even closer in the future. Now, Mingyu said, I remember listening to the morning routine live stream on my way to reserve training last year, and I'm listening to it again today while I'm at reserve training. I hope you complete your training well and come back safely. Okay, Rice Cake and Wheat Cake mentioned they are at the airport heading to Japan. Baby, regarding my outfit today, you described it as a cherry blossom look. Yes, you said that through the sacrifice of one person, 14,000 people are receiving knowledge. Oh my, hearing you express it like that makes my shoulders feel heavy. Now, well, this is your first comment, but you said it has become a morning routine habit for you, so please keep doing it for a long time. So, our board said they are in the Air Force, specifically the 62nd class. Pharmacist Leon is in the 536th class. The class numbers are just moving up right now, and I am in the 593rd class. I'm not sure if I should reveal this, as it is classified, but anyway, that is the situation. Okay, let's wrap up today's broadcast here. Now, regarding the comments, many of you have shared. Let's take a look at this one last time. Algo is an interior designer, said we were really, the prices of materials are really hitting us hard. Yeah. About a year or two ago, I was debating whether or not to remodel my house. Even though I didn't have the money, I just got some quotes, but I didn't do it because it was too expensive. But if I get quotes this year, that would be a good time to buy, right? They must have gone up a lot. But I am really worried about the future. Well, I will be back tomorrow morning with a good summary of the latest news. Please join us for the 8 a.m. live stream. We are currently maintaining a steady audience of about 15,000, but I ask for your continued support and consideration so that we can make a quantum leap to the 20,000 mark. I will see you again tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you.
If you're struggling every day, asking yourself 50 times a day, what should I do next? Then Time Management Mastery, Do More, Stress Less is the course for you. I'm Alexis Hasselberger. Check out my course on Udemy.
Yes. Let's begin our morning routine of reading the Korea Economic Daily together this morning. It is Wednesday, March 25th. It isn't even Happy Wednesday for me because it is payday. Now, there have been so many stories about war recently among today's articles, so I will look at those a little later. First, I would like to introduce an article about Nvidia. The title is Bets from 124 Companies Over 1 Year Building the Nvidia Ecosystem. Now, the U.S. IT media outlet The Information published some interesting advice for startup founders. If you need about $2 billion urgent funds, you should contact Janzeng Wang. You should contact $2 billion is about 300 million won, and this is because Nvidia has emerged as a major player in investment recently. From last year until yesterday, Nvidia has invested in 39 companies across 124 firms. This means they are announcing new investments roughly once every autumn. The scale is growing steadily, with 4 of the 5 largest investments in Nvidia's history pouring in since the end of last year. The background behind Nvidia's ability to expand its investments lies in its astronomical cash reserves. In its most recent fiscal year, the company reported a net profit of $120 billion, which is close to 180 trillion Korean won. Now, to understand Nvidia's investments, we need to look at the AI 5-tier cake mentioned by Jensen Wang. As you can see on the screen, there are various categories ranging from energy to applications. Let me explain this in more detail while we'll watch the video. Yes, the 5-tier cake is a representation of the overall ecosystem related to artificial intelligence that is easy for people to understand. At the very bottom is the energy sector, above that are semiconductors and data centers. Above that are AI-related foundation models and applications that can actually implement artificial intelligence. it is structured with these layers. So all of these elements come together to enable users to utilize artificial intelligence. If we look at Nvidia's recent investments, they are investing across various sectors within this 5-layer cake. First, looking at the energy sector, we can see that Nvidia has invested in companies such as the US SMR company TerraPower. Starting last year, the nuclear fusion startup Cummins, Fusion Systems, and the ESS company Redwood Materials. Jensen Huang stated that what constrains the future of artificial intelligence is electricity, not semiconductors. This means that if power is not supplied properly, everything becomes useless. This can be interpreted to mean that small modular reactors, SMRs, are emerging as the next generation energy source, and it appears that Nvidia has invested significantly in companies that are building a solid foundation for this. Now, the layer right above that is the semiconductor sector, where Nvidia is actively involved. Recently, the technology Nvidia is focusing on in this area is optical conductors. It is garnering attention as a technology capable of resolving data bottlenecks, and I have mentioned several times in the news that it secured investment this month following the signing of a partnership with Lumentum and Corlent. Now, the next level up is data centers. Significant investment is being made here as well, and I have selected 3 companies that I believe will successfully navigate this sector: CoreWeave, Nscale, and Nevius. These companies operate a business where they purchase Microsoft GPUs and lease them to enterprises that require computing resources. Unlike traditional cloud services, they're also referred to as neo-cloud because they specialize in servicing AI resources. It is a term you have likely seen frequently in the news recently. Now, moving up one level to the foundation model, massive investments are being concentrated in this area. You can think of commonly used tools like GPT or Claude. Nvidia invested $12 billion in OpenAI and $10 billion in Anthropic. Beyond these, there have been comprehensive investments across various companies, including Elon Musk, xAI, and World Labs, which implements 3D worlds using artificial intelligence. Now, looking at these examples, Nvidia is employing a strategy of supplying its own GPUs and software through investments to strengthen its dominance, while effectively trapping the invested companies within the ecosystem it has created. In this process, another point of contention on Wall Street has been concerns regarding wash trading. Many partnerships are being formed in the form of companies receiving investment from Nvidia purchasing Nvidia products. For instance, looking at the case of neocloud companies, they use funds received from Nvidia to buy GPUs and then use these as collateral to secure loans from financial institutions like JP Morgan or Blackstone. While these companies are abandoning projects to build data centers using this capital, Nvidia is essentially playing a triple role behind the scenes, supplying GPUs, providing funding, and acting as a customer all at once. Furthermore, Nvidia invested in Lambda and signed a contract to lease 10,000 AI chips. This arrangement, selling Lambda's chips while paying to lease them, has received some negative evaluations, with critics viewing it as a deal designed to boost revenue for Lambda ahead of its IPO. While these actions do not pose immediate problems, investors are concerned that multiple companies will become bound together in a shared destiny. That if GPU demand declines, this risk could amplify across the entire ecosystem. No clear answer has emerged yet, and it seems we will have to wait and see. Jensen Huang continues to strongly argue that his failure rate is low because he only invests in highly attractive companies capable of hitting home runs. Will Nvidia's bold moves, investing approximately every 3 days, succeed? What do you think? Let's keep watching and see how things develop together. Now let's move on to the next article. It is titled, "Is it FOMO or Smart Money? Retail investors net purchased 26 trillion won this month alone." So starting this month, individual investors have recorded a net purchase of like 26.2511 trillion won in the Kaspi market. This is an all-time high on a monthly basis. If we go back 5 years to when the Donghap Ant movement was in full swing, COVID-19 had broken out and a low interest rate environment persisted. 5 years ago, the previous record was 22.333804 trillion won in retail investment funds, flooding the stock market in a single month. But this record has been broken as the enthusiasm has intensified. Recently, while global stock market sentiment has cooled somewhat, Korean retail investors are actually viewing the conflict between the US and Iran as an opportunity to buy at low prices. On the 3rd of this month, when the Kospi index plummeted by over 7%, individual investors net purchased nearly 6 trillion won premium. The day before yesterday, when the index fell by over 6%, they net purchased 7 trillion won, marking an all-time high for a single day. Yesterday as well, retail investors net purchased over 700 million won, becoming the primary contributors to the KOSP index's rebound. An analysis of which stocks retail investors bought on the Kospi reveals that since the outbreak of the war, they have concentrated their purchases on large-cap stocks, including Samsung Electronics. This month alone, they bought 11.6 trillion won worth of Samsung Electronics and also purchased over 3 trillion won each of SK Hynix and Hyundai Motor. However, the fact that the volume of leveraged investments has increased by over 20% over the past few months appears somewhat concerning. Nevertheless, securities analysts are speaking somewhat optimistically. They argue that because investments are concentrated on large-cap semiconductor stocks, the risk is relatively low, and it should not be viewed as an overly reckless investment. The recent deterioration in profitability in markets other than stocks is cited as a reason for the significant influx of money into the KOSP. With the cryptocurrency market underperforming and government regulations on real estate expected to tighten, individual investors' funds are increasingly flowing into the stock market. I will summarize the situation regarding the US market and the cryptocurrency market from last night shortly. Now, let's look at the Middle East. This article concerns Trump's two-pronged strategy, calling for an end to the war while secretly urging an increase in troop deployments. The market initially reacted positively to President Trump's remarks that he was having productive talks with Iran, but the atmosphere has shifted slightly over the past day. This is because concerns have emerged regarding whether President Trump's words can be fully trusted and whether he is exaggerating the situation. Meanwhile, oil prices showed signs of rising again last night. Brent crude rose 4.6% to close at the $104 per barrel level, while West Texas Intermediate WTI crude rose 4.8% to recover the $92 range. The Hormuz sector remains under lockdown, and oil supply disruptions persist. Now, the U.S. stock market has also turned downward again. The Dow Jones fell 0.18%, the S&P 500 fell 0.37%, and the Nasdaq fell 0.84%. Bond prices are also fluctuating. The yield on U.S. 10-year treasuries rose on the OBP, and the yield on U.S. 2-year treasuries, a product particularly sensitive to monetary policy, rose 9 basis points. Gold prices also failed to rebound, maintaining the $4,400 per ounce level. The reason the market cannot fully trust Trump's remarks is due to his statements that seem to swing between cold and hot since the war began. Regarding this, there are quite a few analyses attributing it to Trump's characteristic negotiation strategy. According to a Financial Times article, Trump has taken the exact same approach to these issues since the late 1980s when he first ran for president. The U.S. harbors concerns about why it should bear the cost of defending Hormuz and believes it must seize Iranian oil fields and completely destroy or occupy the island of Har. In other words, the role of the U.S. controlling Iran's oil has remained the same for 40 years. However, as the war situation has not recently unfolded as planned, interpretation suggests that U.S. is employing a cowardice strategy alternating between threats and negotiations. Now, if we take a look at the various news reports from last night, President Trump continues to fuel expectations for negotiations. He stated that Iran has delivered a big gift to the U.S., which arrived today. He described this as a massive gift of immense value, specifically regarding oil and gas. This is interpreted as an attempt to alleviate market anxiety. However, the actual situation in the Middle East is somewhat different. It is not entirely unreasonable to question whether continuing to mention such negotiations is a sign of the times. According to reports from various foreign media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. Department of Defense plans to send a combat unit of approximately 300 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division, the Army's most elite unit, to the Middle East, and it has been reported that an official deployment order will be issued soon. Once combat troops are deployed to the Middle East, operations such as forcibly opening the threshold of Hormuz or occupying Iran to secure enriched uranium will become much easier. In addition to this, there are reports that amphibious ships stationed in Japan and 20 to 100 troops from the Marine Expeditionary Force are scheduled to enter the Middle East region on the 30th before the negotiation draft concludes. This suggests that this situation remains critical. Meanwhile, the market predicts that President Trump might once again declare the negotiations null and void, attempt an operation, and then unilaterally declare victory in the war. Of course, there is also a view that this is intended to be used as a means of pressure during the negotiation process. Iran is anxious that if it responds easily to Trump's words, it could be blindsided, although they have consistently and publicly denied that negotiations were underway. Synthesizing reports from various media outlets confirms to some extent that the two sides have exchanged messages through China. Now, there is also speculation that the US and Iran could meet in person in Pakistan. However, there are opinions that even if they do meet, finding a breakthrough is another matter entirely. Also, just before the broadcast began, there was some news that broke. It was reported by an Israeli broadcaster. There was news that the U.S. proposed a month ceasefire and the opening of waters off Hormuz to Iran, stating that the U.S. has conveyed 15 demands as conditions for ending the war. Of course, there has been no word yet on whether Iran will accept these demands. While the situation remains uncertain, the stock market is showing some signs of relief. After the market closed, international oil prices began to move downward again, and U.S. stock index futures also showed signs of rising. We will monitor this a bit more and provide an update on tomorrow's broadcast. Okay, I will continue with this situation in the U.S. shortly. Let's look at another story. It is an article titled, IC Deports 620,000 Immigrants Freezing the U.S. Job Market. Now, looking at the Financial Times article, it states that negative impacts from the Trump administration's immigration policies are appearing in U.S. industries such as construction, services, and agriculture. These industries account for about 9% of the U.S. GDP. According to a survey by the American Restaurant Association, 55% of restaurant owners said their business was negatively affected by immigration crackdowns, and 25% said they are struggling to hire and retain staff. Undocumented immigrants have historically provided cheap labor, but as their numbers decrease, it is becoming difficult to keep businesses running. Furthermore, as immigration and customs enforcement IC agents continue high-intensity crackdowns, even migrant workers with legitimate visas are avoiding going to work. In the agricultural sector, if they obtain a special visa, they can legally hire migrant workers needed for seasonal purposes. It is true that there are considerable complaints that ISC officials do not understand the system and are halting operations by conducting unreasonable crackdowns. According to a New York Times report, 620,000 people have been deported since President took office, but the Brookings Institute, a U.S. policy research organization, estimates that net immigration to the U.S. decreased by at least 10,000 and as much as 290,000 last year. Consequently, they projected that this year's economic growth rate could drop by a minimum of 0.12 percentage points to a maximum of 0.32 percentage points as the economic impact generated by immigrants shrinks. This analysis takes into account the contraction in consumption caused by the decrease in the foreign population. The White House, however, maintains that there is no problem, arguing that the unemployed in the U.S. can fill the shortage of jobs. Foreign media reports indicate that a significant number of figures in the Trump camp view the 1920s, a period when full employment for domestic workers was achieved, as their ideal. At that time, it was a period when the employment of foreigners was minimized by applying strict quotas based on nationality. However, there are quite a few differing opinions of such measures still today. The argument is that in an era of low birth rates and an aging population, eliminating immigration would make it impossible to adequately cope with the death toll. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that President Trump instructed his aides to moderate the intensity of his large-scale deportation policy. Some interpret this lowering of the intensity as a move made in consideration of these impacts. Now let's turn our attention to the UK. The article is titled, New Musicals Go to West End Over New York. Now the dream stage that artists around the world yearn for, or rather Broadway in New York, is said to be lacking in new productions recently. According to a New York Times article, due to soaring production costs, a new form of offshore shoring is spreading, with American producers crossing the Atlantic to stage productions in London, the Habstein. In the video, you are currently taking a look around downtown London's West End. Please listen while watching, as if you were on an overseas trip. Now, because the cost of living in the US has risen more than in the US, producers are heading to London, where there are no language barriers and they can cut costs. On Broadway just 10 years ago, it was very rare for a production to require a budget exceeding $30 billion. But now, that has become the near standard. Even if a show manages to open with difficulty, it is said that making a profit is not easy. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, 48 new musicals have opened on Broadway, but only 4 have managed to break even now. The US is a performance market that rivals the United States. Musical masterpieces that many people are familiar with, such as The Phantom of the Opera, Temin, all premiered in London's West End, Gopon, all premiered in London's West End. Recently, there have been many instances of new productions led by American producers having their world premieres in London. Government support is also said to be influencing this environment. The US is implementing strong support measures such as returning 40% of production costs as a tax credit. In New York, the tax deduction was only 25%, and even that reportedly ended at the end of last year. Although ticket prices nationwide are cheaper than in the US, the audience base is solid and discerning. Considering these factors, there are instances where Korean productions are knocking on the London market first. Next, the production The Age of Joseon, which you just saw in the photo, is preparing for a London run. Productions like The Goddess is Watching and Keys, Borderline Personality Disorder Diary are also reportedly in full swing with preparations. The idea that Broadway is shaking while the West End is rising seems like a rather interesting trend. How expensive must it be for them to travel to such a distant country to perform? Now let's summarize the situation in the domestic financial market. Yesterday, the Kospi index rose 2.74% to close at 5,553, and the Kosdaq index increased 2.24% to 1,121. The $1 exchange rate dropped sharply by over 22 settling at the 1,495 level for the week. Now, while the stock market abandoned its relief rally as President Trump postponed bombings, it also became evident that volatility remains high. Looking at the market trends yesterday, both the Kospi and Kosdaq started with strong rebounds, but fluctuated throughout the day. The indices fell after reports that the Federal Reserve was attacked by Iran, causing power outages in multiple regions, but then rebounded following reports that a confrontation between the US and Iran could occur in Pakistan this week. Both Japan's Nikkei and China's Shanghai Composite Index recorded gains in the 1%, while the Taiwan stock market closed slightly lower. Looking at the overall situation of the Kospi, individual and institutional investors drove the index up with net buying, while foreign investors continued to sell off stocks. The 2 leading semiconductor stocks both rose. Among the top market capitalization stocks, LG Energy Solutions stands out. It rose 10.25% to close at 390,501. Now, secondary battery holding stocks generally showed strong performance yesterday. These battery stocks had fallen significantly after the outbreak of war, reflecting concerns regarding raw material supply chain disruptions. However, the rebound is interpreted as a result of attention being drawn to the markets, where domestic companies are focusing amidst the turbulent energy market. Yesterday, LNF also rose by 11.51% to 51%, recording 125,001. The announcement that it will supply cathode materials for LFP batteries worth 1.6 trillion to Samsung SDI starting next year acted as a positive catalyst. It is said to be the largest LFP cathode material supply contract awarding Chinese companies. Now let's take a look at the Kosdaq market. Foreign and institutional investors were net buyers, while individual investors were selling stocks. 300 Pharmaceutical, the number 1 stock by market capitalization, touched 1,025,001 at one point yesterday, ascending to the status of an improved stock. The The closing price fell slightly, ending at 936,000 won, down 0.53%. A notable feature was that as semiconductor stocks rose on the cost buy, equipment stocks like Hynix IPS and Jusung Engineering also showed strength on the Kosdaq. Now, we're in the row. The optical communication stock I introduced yesterday in my morning routine is hitting the daily upper limit for the second consecutive day. For the stock price has risen to 44,575 won. Another notable gain is Hyundai HIM. Hygiene R&M is being removed from the Kosdaq 150 index, and Hyundai HIM is being added in its place, with the changes taking effect starting tomorrow. Inclusion in this index automatically brings in investment funds for the Kosdaq 150 ETF, so it is now classified as a positive catalyst. Yuhan Securities analyzed that the rebalancing buying demand for Hyundai HIM is approximately 18 billion won, which is 2.4 times the trading volume. Now let's check a few more news items related to listed companies. Let's take a look at SKNTX first. First, the article is titled 1 Wheel out of 1 trillion won investment to introduce 20 UV machines. SK Hynix disclosed its investment plans yesterday. What stands out is the plan to invest 12 trillion won by next year to introduce EUV lithography equipment from ASML of the Netherlands. This lithography equipment is very expensive as it uses light to draw circuits on wafers. It is essential for manufacturing next-generation semiconductors, and this can be interpreted as a move to invest aggressively to maintain leadership in the memory market. It is known that the plan is to purchase around 20 units. Now, before we start the broadcast, there is another disclosure from SK Hynix. They have officially announced the procedures for preparing for a listing on the US stock market. They stated that they have submitted a registration application for a public offering of American Depositary Receipts, ADRs, to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Their goal is to list within this year, but they mentioned that the offering size and schedule have not yet been finalized in detail and will disclose them through a further date disclosure. Yesterday, SK Hynix rose 5.68% to close at 986,000 won. Here is the next article. It is titled, Samsung Foundry Achieves 60% Yield. It is reported that Samsung Electronics has raised the yield of its 2nm semiconductor foundry process, which is produced for clients including China, Canon, and Microbit, to over 60%. As recently as the second half of last year, it remained in the 20% range, meaning it has tripled. Yield refers to the percentage of good products among the total output plus. If we assume 100 chips are produced from a wafer, a yield of 60% means that 60 of them were normal chips. The higher this figure, the better, as it indicates potential for reducing production costs. 2nm semiconductors represent the latest existing technology, and it has been pointed out that raising yield is not easy due to the highly demanding nature of the process. With TSMC's 2nm process yield exceeding 60%, the attention is focused on whether Samsung Electronics can catch up significantly. Samsung Electronics is also manufacturing Exynos chips for its smartphones, but the average yield there is reportedly still below 50%, though. However, it is said to be improving slightly compared to the past. Yesterday, Samsung Electronics rose 1.83% to close at 189,700 won. The next article is titled Record-Breaking Shareholder Returns by My Securities. Mirae Securities held its general shareholders meeting yesterday and passed a shareholder return plan. The plan includes over 170 billion won in cash dividends, over 290 billion won in stock dividends, and over 170 billion won in treasury shares. When combined, this amounts to the 630 billion won range. This means returning approximately 40% of last year's net profit to shareholders. Now, the reason Mirae-related stocks have recently garnered significant attention in the stock market is their equity investment in SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk. Several affiliates of the Mirae Group invested in three entities, SpaceX, XAI, and X, and it is reported that Mirae Securities directly contributed 610 billion won, since the valuation reflected in last year's financial statements was 1.9 trillion won. This means they have already achieved an unrealized profit of 1.3 trillion won. Wow. Mirae Securities stock price did drop slightly yesterday, falling 1.29% to a record 61,100 won. The next article is titled Hyundai Motor Group launches robot hydrogen control tower. Hyundai Motor Group has established a control tower organization to oversee its robotics and hydrogen businesses. It is named RHPMO and is a headquarters level organization. It is said that RH stands for the first letters of robotics and hydrogen. The organization's mission is to focus on increasing investment efficiency while coordinating fund execution through active investment in new future industries. Although robots and hydrogen might seem like an unlikely combination at first glance, the decision to group them into one organization reflects the judgment that a stable power supply is essential for AI and robot technology. Hyundai Motor Group has decided to utilize hydrogen energy technology to secure power. The plan involves pre-producing hydrogen using water decomposition technology with surplus electricity and then using this hydrogen in fuel cells to generate power when needed. In the robot business, the goal is to establish an annual production capacity of 30,000 units by the year after next, while in the hydrogen business sector, a factory is being built in Ulsan with the goal of commencing operations. Yesterday, Hyundai Motor stock price closed at 492,000 won, up 1.44%, while the Kia Group fell 2.35% to 150.55%, 150 centos. The next article is titled, CEO Chun-in takes the gavel at Celtrans general meeting for the first time in 11 years. The Sulfion Group Chairman Seo Young-jin attended the general shareholders meeting yesterday and pledged to ensure that this year's operating profit exceeds market forecasts. Chairman Seo always seems to love making bold moves, doesn't he? His character was evident here as well. He stated that because this year's business plan was drawn up very conservatively, they can actually jump off all targets and achieve them. He presented quarterly operating profit targets of 300 million won for the first quarter, 400 million won for the second, 500 million won for the third, and 600 billion won for the fourth. Adding them all up, this amounts to 1.8 trillion won for the